A woman searching for mushrooms in rural France meets a 3-foot-tall figure in a transparent spacesuit. A mysterious object crashes in the Mexican desert, and everyone sent to recover it reportedly dies. A family driving on a lonely road loses hours of time and gets taken aboard a UFO. And in Atlantic, Canada, police officers witness a silent glowing object hovering over dark coastal waters. Welcome to Strange Encounters. In the autumn of 1954, France was in the middle of something unusual. Reports of strange objects in the sky and brief encounters with unknown figures were coming in from rural towns all across the country. It was one of those periods where, looking back, it almost feels like the entire countryside was briefly tuned into the same strange frequency. One of the better-known reports from that wave comes from a rural area near Chabeuil, not far from Valence in southeastern France. The account is usually associated with a woman identified as Madame Leboeuf, and it's been repeated in UFO literature for decades, especially in compilations like the book Flying Saucer Occupants by the Lorenzens. According to the story, it was the afternoon of September 26, 1954, and Madame Leboeuf had gone out into the countryside near the edge of some woods to gather mushrooms. It was a fairly ordinary rural scene: fields, trees, a cemetery nearby, and a few people in the distance visiting graves. Nothing that would suggest anything unusual was about to happen. She had her dog with her, and at first everything seemed normal. But then the dog suddenly started acting strangely. It began barking, then shifted into a kind of frantic howling, like it was either frightened or in pain. That alone would have been unsettling, but what made it worse was the way it focused its attention toward the edge of a nearby wheat field, as if it was reacting to something she couldn't yet see. When she looked in the same direction, she noticed what she initially thought might be a scarecrow standing near the field. It was just a still shape, nothing obviously alive at first glance, and in the context of a farm field, a scarecrow would not have been unusual. But as she got a little closer, she realized something was off. The shape wasn't a scarecrow at all. It looked more like a small human figure, maybe around 3 feet tall. It was standing upright, but the details were strange. The body appeared to be covered in something like a suit, but not a normal fabric. It was described as translucent, almost like a thin plastic or cellophane material. The head was covered by a rounded helmet or dome, also semi-transparent, so the face inside was hard to make out clearly. In some versions of the account, she later said she could see eyes, but they didn't look normal. They seemed larger than human eyes. At least, that was the impression she was left with. The whole thing had this unnatural quality to it, like a person seen through frosted glass or distorted light. At first, she didn't react with panic. In fact, she reportedly felt more curious than afraid. But that changed very quickly. The figure began to move toward her. It wasn't described as running or walking normally. Instead, it moved with a short, slightly awkward motion, almost like a waddling gait, and it was coming closer. That was the moment everything shifted. She became frightened, screamed, and ran into some nearby brush or woodland to hide. From there, she tried to look back out, but by then the figure was no longer clearly visible. What happened next is where the story expands beyond just a strange sighting and turns into something more dramatic. Not long after she fled, people in the surrounding area began hearing a strange sound. It was described as a kind of whistling noise or high-pitched mechanical hum. It wasn't like an airplane engine in the usual sense, but something sharper and more piercing. Then several witnesses reported seeing a metallic object rising from the vicinity of the field. It was described as circular or disc-like with a metallic appearance. It lifted up from behind trees or from the edge of the field, and at first it moved relatively slowly at a low altitude. As it crossed over the wheat field, it gained speed and altitude, and then it veered away toward the northeast, accelerating as it went until it disappeared from view. By this point, the situation had escalated from a single witness encounter into something that involved multiple people reacting to sound and movement in the sky. And shortly afterward, more of the village arrived at the scene. When they examined the area where the object was said to have been, they reportedly found clear disturbances in the environment. There was a roughly circular patch of ground, somewhere around 10 to 11 feet across, where the vegetation looked flattened or crushed, as if something heavy had rested there or pressed down from above. Nearby trees also showed signs of disturbance. A branch on an acacia tree was reportedly broken, and another branch higher up had leaves stripped from it, as if exposed to strong force or airflow. In the wheat field itself, the crop was flattened in patterns that radiated outward from the disturbed area, suggesting some kind of directional pressure or movement across it. These physical traces are part of what made the case stand out in UFO literature. It wasn't just a visual encounter anymore. It had what looked like environmental impact. Madame Leboeuf herself was reportedly deeply shaken by the experience. In some accounts, she suffered what was described as a nervous collapse. She stayed in bed for a couple of days with fever-like symptoms and was visibly distressed for some time afterward. Her dog, which had been so agitated during the encounter, was also said to remain frightened and unsettled for days. In the broader UFO literature, the case is sometimes extended further with an additional claim. About half an hour after the incident, an object was reportedly seen at a location known as Col de Chat, roughly 65 miles away to the northeast. That second sighting is sometimes linked to the first, as if the object had traveled rapidly between the 2 points. But that connection is something made by later interpretation rather than anything confirmed by coordinated observation. When you step back from the story, what you're really looking at is a classic example of the 1954 French UFO wave. These cases often share the same structure: a rural witness, a sudden animal reaction, a brief sighting of a humanoid figure in an unusual suit, a fast-moving object in the sky, and sometimes claims of physical traces left behind. But it's also important to recognize how these stories reach us. The Chabeuil case, like many others from that period, comes to us through a chain of reporting that includes early press accounts and later UFO compilations. Each retelling tends to stabilize the story a little more, smoothing out inconsistencies and reinforcing the most dramatic elements. So what remains is a case that is famous in UFO circles, visually striking in its details, and often cited as one of the more interesting occupant reports from France in 1954. At the same time, it's also a reminder that much of what we think we know about these events depends heavily on how they were recorded, retold, and preserved over time, rather than on a single definitive investigation on the ground. In the summer of 1974, deep in the desert borderlands between northern Mexico and Texas, something is said to have happened that never made it into any official public record. yet continues to circulate through UFO research circles as one of the most unusual crash retrieval stories ever told. It's known as the Coyame Incident, and while the details vary depending on the source, most versions of the story begin in the same way, with something strange appearing on radar. According to later reconstructions, radar operators in the Gulf of Mexico region detected an unidentified object moving at extreme speed across the water. It was not behaving like a conventional aircraft. It did not follow a straight trajectory, and it appeared to make controlled directional changes as it moved inland toward Mexico. Its speed and movement patterns immediately stood out. This was not consistent with meteor activity and not consistent with any known aircraft profile of the time. Then, something else appeared, a second radar track. This one was different. It was identified as a small civilian aircraft operating near the Texas-Mexico border region. It was not military, not experimental, just an ordinary plane in a remote area. For a short period, both objects moved independently across radar screens. One was behaving in a structured but unknown way. The other was behaving like a normal aircraft. Then their paths began to converge. According to the accounts that later emerged, radar operators watched as both tracks closed distance over the Chihuahua Desert near the town of Coyame, a remote area of open desert terrain far from major population centers. And then, at the same moment, both signals vanished. No debris was seen from the ground. No visual confirmation of impact was recorded in the initial reports. Only radar data remained, indicating a simultaneous disappearance of both the unidentified object and the civilian aircraft. What exactly that meant was unclear, but it triggered a search response the following day. When search aircraft were deployed over the region, they eventually located wreckage belonging to a small civilian aircraft. The crash site was in the desert, consistent with a forced impact. At that point, the incident could have ended as a tragic but conventional aviation accident, but according to later reports, it did not end there. Near the crash site, search teams allegedly observed something else, a second object. Descriptions vary slightly between accounts, but it is consistently described as metallic, disc-shaped, and approximately 15 to 16 feet in diameter, around 5 feet thick, silver in appearance, without visible windows, markings, or any recognizable propulsion system. It was reportedly damaged, showing signs of impact, including dents and a puncture-like deformation. Some estimates placed its weight at roughly 1,500 pounds, which struck investigators as unusually light for its size if it were a conventional metallic structure. At this point, Mexican military personnel reportedly took control of the site. Civilian access was restricted, communications were limited, and the area was secured under military authority. No official Mexican government documentation confirming these actions has ever been released publicly. But in the later narrative tradition, this is where the situation shifts from crash investigation into containment. According to the most detailed reconstruction of the event, the unidentified object was recovered and loaded onto military transport vehicles for removal from the desert site. A convoy was formed to move the wreckage toward a secure military installation deeper inside Mexico. For a short time, the operation proceeded normally. Then, radio contact with the convoy was suddenly lost. Attempts to reestablish communication failed, And from that moment onward, the situation becomes fragmented and increasingly difficult to verify. Aerial reconnaissance aircraft were reportedly dispatched to locate the missing convoy. What they found, according to the later Deneb report, reconstruction, was deeply unusual. The convoy had stopped in the desert. All vehicles were still present, but there was no movement, no communication, and all personnel were reported dead. The cause of death was never publicly disclosed. No official autopsy records have ever been made available, and no verified government documentation has confirmed the existence of the convoy incident itself. This absence of evidence is one of the central reasons the Coyame case remains controversial, because the story does not end with a crash. It ends with an alleged mass fatality event in the middle of a controlled military operation under unexplained circumstances, and then the narrative takes another turn. According to some versions of the account, the situation escalated beyond Mexican authorities. It has been claimed that a covert recovery operation involving United States personnel may have entered Mexican territory in response to the incident. These claims suggest that outside teams were dispatched to secure the object and assess the situation on the ground. In some retellings, this includes references to protective suits being used, implying concerns about contamination, radiation, or biological hazard. However, no verified U.S. military record has ever confirmed such an operation took place. What remains is only the claim itself, repeated in secondary accounts. According to these same narratives, by the time any external team reached the convoy site, the situation had already been secured in a different sense. The convoy was no longer operational. The object was either recovered or removed shortly afterward, and the vehicles were reportedly disabled or destroyed in the aftermath, though no consistent explanation has ever been provided for how or why. At this point, the story leaves the realm of even loosely traceable documentation, because the Coyame Incident, as it is known today, does not originate from official military records, eyewitness testimony, or contemporaneous journalism. Instead, much of the modern version comes from a document that surfaced years later. Often referred to as the Deneb report, it appears anonymously in UFO research circles and early online forums in the 1990s, presenting itself as a detailed reconstruction of the 1974 event. This document is the primary source for many of the more specific details about the disc-shaped object, the convoy deaths, and the alleged recovery operations, but its authorship has never been confirmed. No individual or organization has ever publicly claimed responsibility for it, and no independent verification has been able to substantiate its contents. Skeptical researchers point out several major issues. There are no confirmed radar logs from the period supporting the initial tracking claims, no verified Mexican military reports confirming a crash involving an unknown object, no identifiable civilian aircraft record that conclusively matches the described sequence of events, and no confirmed documentation of the convoy fatalities. In other words, the entire case exists outside the boundaries of verified official record, and yet the story persists. Part of that persistence comes from how structured it feels compared to many UFO accounts. It includes radar tracking, a physical crash site, military involvement, transport logistics, loss of communication, and a final recovery operation. It reads less like folklore and more like an intelligence summary that was never officially released. And that structure is what continues to draw researchers back to it, because even if the details cannot be confirmed, the pattern it describes is familiar in UFO literature. An unidentified object enters controlled airspace, it is tracked, it disappears, wreckage is found, military authorities intervene, communication is lost, and then silence. What makes Coyame unusual is not just the alleged crash, it's the chain of events that follows it, escalating from observation to recovery to total breakdown in communication, and finally to a complete absence of official acknowledgement. Whether that chain ever actually occurred is unknown. There is no verifiable evidence that it did, but there is also no widely accepted explanation for where the story originated, or why it became so detailed so quickly once it entered UFO literature. And that is where the Coyame Incident remains today, a case built from fragments of radar claims, anonymous documents, and second-hand reconstructions. A story that exists in full detail in some accounts, and not at all in official records. And like many of the most persistent mysteries in UFO history, it leaves behind a simple and uncomfortable question. Not whether something crashed in the desert that night, but whether the silence that followed was ever meant to be noticed at all. If you've ever driven through rural New England at night, you know how quickly the world seems to disappear once the towns are behind you. The roads become darker, the forests seem deeper, and sometimes the only sign of civilization is the glow of your own headlights stretching across the pavement. That's exactly the setting for one of the strangest UFO encounters ever reported in Massachusetts. What's particularly unusual about this story isn't simply the encounter itself, it's what happened afterward. Decades later, the event would become the subject of public controversy, historical recognition, and even a monument erected near the location where the encounter supposedly took place. The story centers on the Reed family and a series of experiences that reportedly occurred in the Berkshire Hills of western Massachusetts during the late 1960s. According to Thomas Reed, the strange events didn't begin on a single night. He later claimed the encounters stretched across several years, beginning when he was still a young child. The family lived in the small town of Sheffield, a quiet community surrounded by rolling hills, forests, and winding country roads. Thomas would later describe seeing unusual lights near the family home, experiencing episodes of missing time, and having memories of encounters that he struggled to explain. His younger brother, Matthew, reportedly experienced similar events. For years, these stories remained largely private. Then came the night that would define the entire case. It was September 1st, 1969. Thomas Reed, his younger brother Matthew, their mother Nancy Reed, and their grandmother Marianne Burroughs were traveling along Route 7 near the old covered bridge in Sheffield. The bridge itself looked like something from another era. Even today, it feels slightly removed from the modern world. As the family drove through the area, they reportedly noticed an unusual light ahead. At first, it appeared to be a bright object suspended above the roadway. But according to later accounts, the object seemed far too large and too bright to be any conventional aircraft. The family watched as the light approached. Then something even stranger happened. Their vehicle reportedly began experiencing problems. The family later claimed that normal awareness of time seemed to disappear. Exactly what happened next depends on whose account you're reading, but the central elements remained remarkably consistent over the years. The family described a period of missing time. They recalled being separated from one another, and they later reported memories of finding themselves inside what appeared to be a large illuminated chamber unlike anything they had ever seen before. Thomas Reed would eventually describe the experience as an abduction. According to his account, the environment was brightly lit and unfamiliar. The family was no longer inside their vehicle. Instead, they seemed to be somewhere else entirely. Then, just as suddenly as the experience began, it was over. The family eventually found themselves back in their car, but significant portions of the evening appeared to be unaccounted for. Missing time reports have become a common feature of UFO lore, but in 1969, the concept was still relatively unfamiliar to most people, and unlike many later cases, this one involved multiple family members who all claimed something unusual had occurred. By itself, that would already make for a fascinating story, but the mystery doesn't end there. One reason researchers continue discussing the Reed case is because the family may not have been the only people reporting strange activity that night. Throughout the Berkshire region, numerous residents later described seeing unusual lights and unexplained aerial objects during the same period. Communities including Great Barrington, Sheffield, Stockbridge, and Egremont all produced reports of strange objects in the sky. Witnesses reportedly contacted local radio stations to describe unusual aerial activity. Some claim the objects maneuvered in ways that conventional aircraft could not. Others describe brilliant lights hovering silently above the landscape. Whether these reports were connected to the Reed family's experience remains impossible to determine, but they added an important layer to the story. Suddenly, this wasn't just a single family's account. It appeared to be part of a much larger regional mystery. As the years passed, the Reed family continued sharing their experiences. Supporters pointed to the consistency of the family's story. Some also highlighted polygraph examination and various claims of physical effects associated with the encounters. Skeptics, however, raised serious questions. Many of the most detailed accounts emerged years after the original events. Critics argued that memories can change over time, especially when people spend decades revisiting unusual experiences. Others pointed out the lack of photographs, radar evidence, physical artifacts, or independently verified scientific data. Like many famous UFO cases, the evidence depended heavily on witness testimony. And witness testimony is often where believers and skeptics find themselves on opposite sides of the debate. Yet, the most remarkable chapter of the story wouldn't occur in 1969. It would happen more than 4 decades later. In 2015, the Great Barrington Historical Society announced that it would recognize the Reed family encounter as a historically significant local event. The decision immediately attracted national attention. Some supporters celebrated the move as validation that something extraordinary had happened in the Berkshire region. Others argued that preserving a story in a historical archive isn't the same thing as proving it occurred. The debate quickly spread beyond the UFO community. Newspapers, researchers, skeptics, and local residents all weighed in. The controversy became almost as famous as the original encounter itself. Soon afterward, a monument was erected near the reported encounter site. The location eventually became known as the Tom Reed UFO Park. For many visitors, it represented recognition of one of New England's most famous UFO stories. For others, it represented something very different. The monument itself became the subject of local disagreements and political controversy. Questions arose regarding its wording, its placement, and what exactly it was commemorating. In a strange twist, the argument over the monument generated nearly as much attention as the UFO encounter that inspired it. Today, more than half a century after that September night, the Reed family case remains unresolved. Supporters view it as one of the strongest multi-witness abduction cases in the United States. Skeptics see it as an interesting story supported largely by memories and testimony rather than hard evidence. And somewhere between those two positions lies the reason the case continues to endure. Not because everyone agrees on what happened, but because nobody can fully explain why a quiet family driving through the Berkshire Hills became the center of a mystery that still sparks debate more than 50 years later. Whether the Reed family experienced a genuine encounter with something unknown, or whether another explanation remains hidden in the details, the story has secured a permanent place in UFO history. And perhaps that's the strangest part of all. A mystery from a dark country road in Massachusetts somehow became a piece of local history. If you drive along the coast of Newfoundland at night, there's a kind of silence out there that feels different from anywhere else. No traffic, no city glow, just dark water and open sky. And that's exactly the kind of setting where two of Canada's most talked about UFO events took place. One happened in 1967 in a small fishing community called Shag Harbour in Nova Scotia. The other came a little over a decade later near Clarenville, Newfoundland. And when you put them side by side, the similarities start to get a little uncomfortable for anyone trying to dismiss them as simple misidentifications. Let's start with a recap of the Shag Harbour incident because it sets the stage for everything that comes after. It's been covered in greater detail in Strange Encounters episode number 33. On the night of October 4th, 1967, residents along the coast of Nova Scotia saw something strange moving over the water. Multiple people reported a bright object descending toward the harbor. At first, many assumed it was an aircraft crash. That was the obvious explanation. But here's where it gets interesting. Local fishermen and residents called it in almost immediately, and within hours, the Canadian authorities were involved. Even the RCMP responded, along with search and rescue teams. They expected debris, survivors, a downed plane. But when they got to the water, there was nothing floating, no wreckage, no fuel slick that matched an aircraft, just foam on the surface and a strange, lingering uncertainty about what had actually gone into the sea. Divers searched for days. Nothing was ever recovered, and officially, the case was logged as an unidentified object entering the water. Not a plane, not a known crash, just unknown. That alone would have made it a curious footnote in history, but it didn't end there, because more than a decade later, something similar would happen again, this time not in Nova Scotia, but over in Newfoundland near Clarenville. Now, fast forward to the late 1970s. Near Clarenville, Newfoundland, residents begin reporting something unusual over the water. A large glowing object, low altitude, silent. Some people think it might be an aircraft at first. That's always the first assumption. But the details don't line up. Witnesses describe a structured object, something solid looking, with bright lights in red, white, and sometimes blue. It isn't flying in a typical pattern, it's hovering, holding position over the water for long stretches of time. And most importantly, it's quiet. No engine noise, no rotor sound, nothing. That detail comes up again and again in UFO cases over water, and it always raises eyebrows because even modern helicopters produce enough sound to carry for kilometers across calm water. This object didn't seem to behave like anything conventional. At some point, local witnesses do what you'd expect. They call the police. And this is where the Clarenville case becomes especially interesting. An RCMP officer arrives on scene and observes the object personally. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or RCMP, is Canada's national police force and federal law enforcement agency. It uniquely serves as the federal police, provincial police in 8 provinces, territorial police in 3 territories, and local police for over 150 municipalities, combining the roles of the US FBI, state police, and local sheriffs. Now, whether you look at this case skeptically or not, that detail matters, because police officers are trained observers. They're not supposed to jump to conclusions, and they're used to making sense of unusual nighttime situations. According to multiple accounts, the officer sees a large illuminated object over the water, hovering low and remaining in place for an extended period. He reportedly watches it for quite a while, long enough that it doesn't feel like a quick glance or a passing light. At one point, there are even reports that the object seemed to respond to light signals or changed its lighting behavior while being observed. And then, after a prolonged period of hovering, it leaves, not gradually, rapidly, straight upward and away. Now, if Clarenville was the only case like this, it would probably sit quietly in the archives as an odd local story. But it isn't alone, because if you compare it to Shag Harbour, the overlap becomes hard to ignore. Let's break it down. Both incidents happen over or near water, specifically coastal Atlantic Canada. That matters because water tends to produce reflections, distortions of light, and misinterpretations of distance at night. Skeptics often point to this when explaining UFO reports. But it also raises a question. Why do so many structured, repeated reports come from the same kind of environment? Shag Harbour, Clarenville, and dozens of lesser-known cases along maritime routes. In both cases, you don't just have a single person reporting something strange, you have groups. In Shag Harbour, multiple residents saw the object descend. In Clarenville, multiple civilians report the hovering light before authorities arrive. This matters because it reduces the chances that the entire thing comes down to one misinterpretation or one overactive imagination. People tend to correct each other in groups. If someone sees a helicopter, another person usually says, "Yeah, that's a helicopter." But in these cases, the descriptions line up instead of diverging. Both cases escalate beyond civilian reports. Shag Harbour brings in RCMP, search teams, and divers. Clarenville brings in RCMP observation directly at the scene. That's rare in UFO reporting. Most sightings never reach that level of official engagement, and in both cases, investigators are left without a clear, conventional explanation that fits what was reported. The silence of the observed object is one of the most striking overlaps. In both incidents, witnesses emphasize the lack of sound. Shag Harbour observers didn't report the typical crash noise or aircraft sound one would expect if something had hit the water. Clarenville witnesses consistently describe silence during the entire event, even when the object is low and close enough that sound should have been clearly audible. That detail tends to stick with people because it removes one of the easiest explanations off the table. Despite the similarities, there's one major difference between Shag Harbour and Clarenville. Shag Harbour appears to involve something entering the water. Clarenville involves something hovering above it. So if you line them up chronologically, it almost feels like two different phases of the same type of phenomenon. One, descent and disappearance. The other, observation and departure. But that's where interpretation starts to take over and where skeptics and researchers tend to split. If you strip away the excitement and just look at the raw structure of both cases, you're left with something simple. Multiple witnesses, overwater locations, unidentified illuminated objects, official response involvement, no physical evidence recovered, no confirmed conventional explanation. That's it. No crash debris in Shag Harbour, no unidentified aircraft in Clarenville. Just accounts, observations, and unanswered questions. The temptation with cases like these is always to jump to conclusions. Either it was definitely something extraordinary, or it was definitely something misidentified. But the truth is, what makes both Shag Harbour and Clarenville interesting isn't that they prove anything, it's that they resist easy closure. And in a world where most strange sightings fade after a day or two, these ones didn't disappear into rumor. They stayed in the record. They were written down, they were investigated, and decades later, people are still comparing them side by side, trying to figure out whether they were separate incidents or just two chapters of the same unanswered story playing out over the Atlantic coast. Thanks for joining us, and thanks so much for helping Strange Encounters reach over 3,000 subscribers. If you haven't already, make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into the unexplained. Your curiosity keeps these stories alive, and there's so much more waiting just beyond the ordinary. I'll see you in the next episode of Strange Encounters.